So welcome to Learning Happy Hour. Mitch and Jason are both off this week, but we didn't want to leave you guys hanging. So we brought to you a special bonus episode.
In this episode, we do an interview with Bryan Lee, and he takes Mitch and I through the cybersecurity zoo, where we learn that kittens are not as cuddly as they appear and that pandas just might want to eat you.
So we hope you enjoy this episode with Bryan Lee, Unit 42.
So we are here with Bryan Lee. He works with our Unit 42 threat research team. So thank you for joining us, Bryan. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name's Bryan. I'm a principal researcher with Unit 42.
Oh, principal, like the lead, the main guy.
No, I'm just.
If the other guys get in trouble, they
there's like
see the
there's like senior principals.
Oh, really?
Just like a regular principal. Yeah, we've got all kinds of crazy stuff going on.
I like the naming scheme. We might have to ask for something like that.
Yeah.
Your focus is on which of the famous APT groups?
So I don't like using the term APT. Let's start there.
So nickname, how do you refer to them?
So I generally refer to them as espionage motivated adversaries. I know it's way longer and not as catchy as APT, but APT has a weird history, right? So it originated from the government.
Yeah.
EMA.
That's what I was thinking of.
So basically it was...
Enema, for short.
At one point, it was a polite way to refer to a specific nation state because they had no other way to refer to it.
Yeah.
That eventually got taken by Mandiant, and they coined the term APT-1. That was the first group they really started researching in. They published a big report on it, and they called it Advanced Persistent Threat, putting it into the public nomenclature. My problem right now is that pretty much everyone just throws around the term APT when they want to sound dark and scary.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, APTs.
Yeah.
What does that even mean, right?
I've done it.
Right, we all have. At some point, we just want to scare someone, just like APTs. And like, oh my god, I don't know what's happening.
You kids be good, or APT's going to get you.
Yeah, that's right. It's in the closet over there.
That's right. That's in the cloud.
That's right. It's in the cloud now. So, even the term itself, advanced persistent threat, most of these threats that are espionage motivated, they can be advanced. Some of them probably are, but by and large, most of the tactics that we observe are not advanced at all. They are persistent, though, because they basically have unlimited resources, because they may be state-sponsored. It's not like they run out of money, unless you are some specific countries. So they just kind of have all their time to perform their mission, and whatever their mission may be, which could be, go attack this IP and exfiltrate this data. That's all that operator generally will know. They're working in a very limited scope. You may have other teams that's responsible for the actual exfiltration. You have other teams responsible for development. You have other teams responsible for delivery. So oftentimes it's very siloed. That's not saying everybody is, but that may be the case.
Interesting.
So it's like, I hate to do this, it's kind of like Mr. Robot, it sounds like, right? Where one person, she's the malware expert, right? And then someone else is the social engineer who does the delivery.
So Mr. Robot is probably the most accurate depiction of how all this stuff works. Now, obviously, it is dramatized because they ended up taking down the economy. Could happen. Not saying it can't happen.
No.
Could happen. But the way they executed their attacks, definitely, not everyone is going to be a master of everything.
Right.
There probably are some people that know everything, but by and large, you're going to have some people that are really good at development, some people that are really good at doing social engineering, some people that's really good at just developing malware. So
this is like any team, like the Golden
Absolutely.
State Warriors are a good example of that,
Forwards,
right?
guards. Those are the only two sports terms I know, by the way.
And that's the thing to remember, right? There are still people out there. Although they may be leveraging things like AI, machine learning, and all kinds of automated tools that we talk about constantly, we're really only seeing the output of all that. So behind the screen door, they are developing all these tools, they're automating stuff, but we only see the actual attack. So we don't know what they used. We don't know if they even did use AI or machine learning or other automated tools. They could have written them by hand for all we know, but what we just see is the attack itself. Now, as for where I'm focused in, I pretty much generally look at the big four, and the big four being, so I'm going to use CrowdStrike's naming schemes here because they allow me to refer to countries without actually saying them, and it's very obvious, well, generally pretty obvious who they are. So we got your Pandas. We all know where they come from.
I'm assuming China or one of the Koreas.
You said it.
Okay,
so there's only one country where pandas occur naturally.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Even the red panda?
Those aren't pandas. Those are raccoons.
Pandas.
Those are raccoon family.
Panda's in the name.
It
Let
is
him finish.
it's very misleading.
Okay,
I agree. But your panda bear,
He's talking about attribution.
Sorry.
your panda only occurs naturally. in
We
one
do a
country.
nature show on the side.
So those are kind of your classic espionage motivated adversaries, and there are a whole bunch of them, right?
Yeah.
There's anywhere between like 70 and 90 different groups over time. This is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Because
all
as
from
we-
that country.
Supposedly.
Yes,
right?
alleged, yeah.
All right, but as far as we know. But we also can't really agree as an industry if all of these are, what kind of relation they have. Are they just, one entire organization that have 70 different teams under it? Are they 70 disparate, separate teams that don't talk to each other? Are they actually just 3 teams that we keep just naming over and over again? What is it? So it can be really hard to try to figure out and differentiate what that is. It doesn't help that every security company wants their own naming schemes.
Right.
We are also guilty of this. Every once in a while, we're just like, we have to give them a new name because we can't find any relationship with anything else. So now we have a new name again.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's the first assumption, because I come from a bit of an intel background in the military, and each unit could have their own, mission or their own tasking, and they could often be targeting the same sets of people without knowing they're working.
Because need to know, right? Like you're only going to know your own mission. You're not going to know anybody else that's working on it.
Trust me, I went looking for Roswell evidence. I apparently didn't need to know.
So this is a common problem with all the espionage motivated adversaries. But we have the pandas.
Yep.
We also have bears.
Yes.
Okay.
Wait.
So those are the one grouping of adversaries that I will say are Russia. Because there's just so much documentation, there's video evidence, and we have indictments. We know specifically who's the GRU agents that were responsible. We know all of this stuff. So the Russians are bears. Bears are Russians. I will say that publicly.
That's good to know.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So those groups are kind of fascinating to me just because, at least today, they are one of the most relevant groupings out there. And we've all seen the impact of what they've been doing all around the world. Mm-hmm. And we've enumerated about 6 groups-ish. So there's not as many as a 70 or 90, right? And they seem to delineate pretty easily as we keep start to track their tooling and how they're actually attacking different groups and organizations, as well as sort of their motivations. It becomes a little obvious what they're doing. They also just don't seem to care anymore. They just kind of...
Like the laws are on their side? Or the cat's out of the
because what's
bag?
going to happen to them, right?
Yeah.
At least with, the pandas, we've actually started seeing some impact of extraditing people and arresting different people. With the bears, they seem to be a little more slippery for one reason or another. We can get maybe they might be greasy bears. So those are a grouping that I generally like to track because they are so loud and they have so much global impact, and we've seen so many other successful attacks that have just hit the news everywhere.
So they kind of like just stomp around instead of sneaking.
Drunken burglars.
Yeah.
I saw something that was fascinating, like during the 2016. That notorious influence that, and I was watching or listening to one journalist who kind of followed the whole series of events. And one of the things that I found fascinating is they would actually start through Facebook social events.
Yep.
They would basically advertise an event that didn't exist. They would create these groups that didn't exist. People would join them, and then people would show up at the front steps of a local government building and start a protest or start a club or group or something.
The crazy thing is, at the same time, they'd make another event for the opposite side, and make those people also show up. And no one knows how anybody even got there. All they know is there's now 2 groups that obviously just hate each other. And they're just yelling, and it becomes this whole media event.
That's crazy.
I saw that on the news
spins up the rest of the country, too.
Yeah.
It's insane. But they're so effective at it. And none of that's new. That's the thing.
Yeah.
This is all just traditional propaganda. It's all information warfare.
Yeah.
None of it is new. It's just today, they can do that using computers, using Facebook, using Twitter, using LinkedIn, setting up websites. We can really do whatever they want, just setting up personas everywhere. And it's just so incredibly effective. And I don't think we've really seen any other of these types of groups really use that technique so heavily. They may be, but from what we've observed, at least over time with the election, with Brexit, with other events that have been occurring throughout the world, this is something that they've been consistently doing now for the last few years.
Seeding chaos.
Absolutely.
So there's he's listing 4. We've gotten through 2.
Yep, we got through 2.
Oh.
So
Good catch.
we're still on question number 1.
I got 4 more questions.
So the third one are kittens. That one is not quite obvious. I will say they operate out of the Middle East. Okay, so there's only really one country out in the Middle East that is so obvious and loud. There's definitely multiple countries in the Middle East that may or may not have capabilities.
I was going to say, like, I got the Iranians, the Saudis.
Yeah, so there's one country in particular that is just extremely motivated, extremely capable, resourceful.
Do they hate Israel?
Yes.
I know who it is.
They suffered their own massive attack back in the 2010s, and you probably know which one I'm talking about. That was a beautiful attack, by the way.
Maybe everyone doesn't know. Do you mind?
So that attack was Stuxnet. So Stuxnet was an incredible attack simply because the defenses were actually quite hardened. They had already gone and taken steps to air-gap the network. They had strong security policies everywhere. But the attack was so specially crafted that, it was so hard to detect it. Not to mention, they used traditional social engineering techniques. So because they could not enter the network traditionally, they started dropping USB sticks everywhere. Yeah. At some point, someone was just like, let's see what's on this USB stick. And they had crafted malware in there that specifically looked for those Siemens controllers. So if you install it anywhere else in the world, unless you had that specific model, it wouldn't do anything. In addition to that, they used multiple 0 days that had never been seen before. That probably on the black market would have been worth something.
Now, I read a assumption that many of those 0 days came from a certain Western ally. You think?
Let's just say we're very friendly with the countries involved.
Yes. Okay.
Now, and just to clarify, what you were just describing was not kittens. This was an attack against the same nation state.
Correct. The one that
may or may not be associated with kittens.
Absolutely, yeah. So the country now, or the groupings of groups. The grouping that we now refer to as kittens suffered that attack back in the 2010s. Nice. So it blew up their nuclear power plants, and it's really set that program back decades.
And didn't you tell me once that it was foreign inspectors that actually clued them in to the fact that the centrifuges shouldn't be burning?
Yeah. So they were because it was impossible to know. All they did was just slightly accelerate those, and to a point where it would just slightly turn everything out of whack and basically blow it up at some point. Yeah, it's an incredible attack if you think about it. Like, you really have to sit there and think, how can I do this in the most silent way possible? So it was a beautiful attack. But ever since then, that grouping of kittens, they seem to have accelerated their offensive and defensive capabilities. They have multiple attacks attributed to that area. Shamoon 1.
Is that a type of cat?
So Shamoon 1 was one of the first instances of a wiping and worming Trojan. Most famously, it hit Saudi Aramco back in 2012, I believe. So wiped out 30,000 systems there, just wormed all the way throughout their network. Fairly simple attack, but they didn't really give a lot of details at the time. So Shamoon 2 came back in 2016. We discovered that one, and we were so creative, we just called it Shamoon 2. Yeah, we're smart. But we had an opportunity to actually take a better look at that attack. And it wasn't very complicated. Leveraged existing Windows tools to actually traverse the network, so using things like WMI and PowerShell. Existing tools. All they did was attach a text file of credentials inside so that it was using admin credentials to send itself everywhere. The driver to actually wipe the disks was a shareware driver. They had downloaded it back in 2012 using the trial license. Still using it in 2016. The trial license expired in 30 days back in 2012, but they just added an additional command to change the system date to 2012. Because why not? It still works. So in that instance with Shamoon 2, fortunately we were able to get in front of that quick enough where we put that information out, we helped our customers out, so the impact seemed fairly minimal. But just a couple months ago, we then saw Shamoon 3. I know, the third round, right? Still very similar. The attack is still very similar. The driver is still exactly the same, the one that expired in 2012. This one actually hit the news because there was I believe an Italian company that was hit by a logistics company. They had all their systems wiped out. But, this kind of reiterates back to the fact, too, that these adversaries, they are still human beings, which means they are still lazy. And much like you and I and anybody else, if something works once, why wouldn't it work again? Yeah. And then if it worked twice, it's probably going to work a third time. And we just keep seeing this over and over and over again. So even though, we know a lot about these adversaries, whether it's kittens or bears or whatever, we still have a hard time executing the defenses. It's unfortunate, but defense is it's complicated. When you talk about, let's say I have a dozen systems on my network, I can secure those easily, right? I know exactly what 12 they are. I know what we do. I know who you are. I know what you like to click on. When you start scaling that out to thousands of systems, though, things start getting complicated. And then when you start bringing in the actual business. So this is one of the biggest frustrations for, I think, security professionals, is that although we're all very bought into we need to secure our network, at the end of the day, we're going to take a second seat to the actual business itself. The business always will come first.
I struggle with that one.
Everyone struggles with it, and it's an unfortunate reality for security people.
Yeah.
But without the business, security doesn't even exist.
But if you are lax in security, the business might not exist. Did you know
So
TAR,
we
for
keep
example?
thinking this, but it hasn't happened.
Did you know TAR is gone now as a CA because their root cert and private key leaked by one of the kitten
But let's look at Equifax.
Yeah, that's true. And Target and
They're
Marriott.
still making tons of money.
Yeah.
Equifax actually now has an identity protection service that
It doesn't
they're
work.
happy to sell you
Yeah.
after they got breached.
Which is owned by Experian, by the way, which I think is comical.
It's insane,
Yeah.
right? And I believe it's because this isn't really tangible to your average person still.
It's a disinformation campaign for their benefit.
So, like, okay, a bunch of my PII got leaked. What does that mean to me? You know, okay, so someone can open a bank account or something? Like, is that even going to happen? There are millions of records out there. Not saying it's not going to happen, but the chances are actually fairly little. Not to mention, we actually have pretty good controls of, okay, if this is open in my name, I can also close it.
Yeah,
I can go remediate it pretty easily. So it gets very difficult to try to convey that message that, you know, business does come first. We have to be able to enable that business in a smart way. Maybe at some point the business side starts thinking about security first, but I don't think that's actually going to happen until some sort of result happens from getting breached and losing all your customer data or losing money or anything like that.
I was really hoping GDPR would have some teeth in it for breaches, but I haven't seen it yet.
I think it may eventually, once someone actually managed to leverage it. There's also an interesting thing about cyber insurance that I just want to touch on real quick.
Wait, can we pause for just one second?
Yes.
Okay. Because this thing keeps vibrating and I think it's off. Oh, dang.
Now, before you come to cyber insurance, we have a fourth.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I'll cover the fourth one, then I'll go to cyber insurance. I found the cyber insurance one really funny. You guys may have heard about this already.
Well, we were talking to Nate Bidding a little bit about, because he's on the customer success team, and some companies, you know, they just decide to buy insurance as...
But we want to do number 4 before we start.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so
number 4.
we got
infamous number.
We got pandas.
Yeah, pandas, bears, kittens.
Oh my.
And I know, right? You can blame CrowdStrike for this naming scheme. It is easy to delineate them. I mean, I understand why they did it, but yeah, it gets ridiculous. And then the last one are Chollimas. So of the big 4 that I track.
What?
Yeah, what's a Chollima? Nobody knows. You have to go on like Wikipedia to look this up.
Sounds like something you eat.
It is a mythical Chinese winged horse. So like a Chinese Pegasus.
Oh.
Yeah. Apparently, if you look at the Wikipedia entry for Chollima, you will find that it leads you to one specific country because it is their soccer team's mascot, their national soccer team's mascot.
I see.
So it's a country that's in the Korean Peninsula.
I thought so. Maybe
there's only 2.
Above the other?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, there's only 2 of them. So, I mean, you can make a pretty good guess. Those guys are strange. They're very loud. They're very active. They're obviously state-sponsored because there's only one Class C in that country, and it's owned by the government. So unless you...
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah, unless you're in the government, you don't have internet access, let alone a computer, right?
Yeah.
So it has to be state-sponsored.
Yep.
We can come to that conclusion. And tracking them has been just crazy. There are entire talks done about trying to split them up, trying to split out, like, so you may have heard of something like the Lazarus group.
Yeah.
Right? So Lazarus group is like an umbrella term for the entire country, kind of like Chollimas.
Okay.
And that starts delineating to separate different names that were mostly named by the other Korea's researchers, so they have pretty cool names. If you're familiar with, like, Diablo.
Yeah.
They love Diablo there.
No,
So
I
they named them like Andariel and like Mephisto and stuff like that. So all these cool names, unlike, you know, kittens or whatever. But those guys are just strange in that they are not only espionage motivated, and that primarily in that region, but you know, we've seen them do other things. But also they have done destruction, as we saw with Sony Pictures. That was finally attributed back to them.
Okay.
For some reason, we, as in the U.S. government, put out an indictment for a single individual. I'm 100% certain it wasn't just one guy.
Yeah.
But that guy is probably now in a deep, dark hole somewhere. In addition to that, they are also willing to rob people, which is weird for a state-sponsored adversary, right?
Well, they got to make money somehow.
Exactly. Because what industry does that country have?
Yeah.
So they're like a APT/cyber criminal gang?
Sort of, you know, and you know, they have different groups within that Lazarus group
I've heard
that
about
seem
this.
to do different things and amongst the Chollimas, and they all have different names for the Chollimas. But but they have different missions, and some of them seem to be just outright go rob these banks, and other ones seem to be like destroy this company or whatever. And they're also likely to be siloed, much like these other teams, but they have very different missions.
And do they do a lot in terms of cryptocurrency?
So that's the working theory right now. There's a lot of chatter about, if they've been robbing banks and they've been doing all these other things, they're probably heavily into the cryptocurrency stuff too. It would make sense. They're already doing it, right? They're already breaching systems. They're already compromising people. They know how to do it. Why wouldn't they also steal some money via cryptocurrencies?
Right.
I'm not sure if there's anything that specifically is attributed to them. And I think it does get difficult in that aspect. Trying to figure out, was it a criminal organization? Plus, these groups that operate out of that region like to play games. They will put weird, I guess you can call them false flags into things. So here's the thing with false flags, too. People like to claim like, it's a false flag, right? Okay, so usually I say, A, what's your evidence? And B, if it is a false flag, it's pretty obvious it's a false flag.
So why wouldn't I do a false flag on my own attack?
You could. So the problem is, it's not that I don't know it's a false flag, it's that I now have a harder time attributing it to one specific group than the other group, right? It could be either one now. But generally, if you look at how an attack is constructed, not just the tool itself or not just the infrastructure, but as a whole, you can get a pretty good idea of who is likely responsible for an attack, even if there is a false flag.
So before we were on camera and started recording, we were having a conversation about attribution. So I wanted to know if you would, if you don't mind, repeat again what you were saying.
Oh, I was recording.
About the difficulty of attribution.
Yeah.
But you have full edit capability.
Yeah,
so
sure.
we're going to let you see it before.
Sure. So attribution is a funny game, and depending on who you ask, it's easy, it's hard, it's useless, it's useful. Everyone's got an opinion about it. For us, we have a very specific definition of attribution. We as in Unit 42 now. So Unit 42, first of all, does not do state attribution or nation-state attribution, which is why I was using CrowdStrike's names. Outside of the Bears, those are Russians. I will say that over and over again. They are Russians. Yeah, okay. I'm just going to keep on saying that. Russians.
So the Bears are Russian?
Bears are Russians, yeah. Russians are bears, I know.
On unicycles?
Right.
I had to do that Family Guy reference.
So outside of that, it's just we don't have the right resources to make that level of attribution. We don't have people on the ground. We don't have people actually observing any adversary in a specific country belongs to a specific unit actually performing these attacks. So without that concrete evidence, all we can really do is, at that point, make claims, and we're just not going to do that without the evidence. So what we do try to do is group these into known threat adversary group names or groupings. So like these Pandas, right? So they have other names other than Pandas, depending on what vendor you are. So you have like Mirage, and you have APT1, you have Comment Crew, you have all these crazy names, but they also have known TTPs within them.
What's TTP?
TTPs, tactics, techniques, and protocols. So basically how they launch and craft these attacks. As I said earlier, because we're all human beings and we keep doing the same things over and over and over again until they stop working, these guys generally tend to stay in that same TTP.
So that's their fingerprint. Their TTP is part of the forensic piece that you guys do to help you build some reasonable attribution, but depending on how strong the TTPs are or other indicators, that has an effect in terms of how confident somebody might be. So having something on film, like the Dutch did when they filmed the Russians perpetrating the attack against the DNS.
That's pretty much as best you can get.
Yeah.
Outside of literally just sitting next to them.
But if it's just a particular tool that they're using, it's likely it might be this group, but then again, another group might have picked up that tool. Or
So the important thing to remember in that aspect too is that the term TTPs covers everything. So maybe we see two separate attacks using the same tools, right? But if they're delivered differently, if their infrastructure looks completely different,
the full life cycle of the attack.
Yeah. If the victims are different, if just everything about it's different, but the tools are similar, you're right. We may say these are possibly related, but we will also state that the attack is constructed completely differently. The infrastructure looks completely different. As far as we know, maybe this tool set is only available to this one group. But yeah, maybe somebody else managed to steal it, or they gave it to them, or maybe they partnered together. Maybe they created Voltron. I don't know. But that's when we start getting to that tricky area of attribution. So we always work in that realm of estimative probability, basically saying things are likely, possible, unless we are 100% certain, such as the Russians, that they are the bears.
So that practice of gathering full spectrum information, I think you referred to it as enumerating them as the attacker. And is that the term that everyone uses?
Probably not. I just like using big words.
It worked.
It makes me sound more right.
I like enumeration.
Right. And it gets really challenging too. We're fortunate enough that we have a good amount of data available to us from many steps of the attack lifecycle. Not all of them, but we have a pretty good view into different things. Plus, we try to partner with potential victim organizations as much as possible to try to get them to share data. That can get difficult.
I was going to ask, how do you do that? If whatever you can share.
Yeah. We just really rely on the kindness of others.
So you phone them up. Hey, sorry you got this black eye, Newegg, but we'd really like to understand this attack.
Pretty much. There are times where basically we assume they don't know that they've been breached or compromised based on the data that we know. And then we will do our due diligence because, let's say they're a customer. I mean, they pay us. Yeah. So we're just here and might as well let them know. It's their own data anyway, and they already got compromised. So we call them up and we basically let them know that you've been attacked by this group or this adversary. They drop these tools, this is what we know about it. We have a reverse engineering report. We know this about the infrastructure. This is probably what they did, et cetera, et cetera. Let us know if you need any help. Sometimes they will say thank you and hang up. Other times they will deny things, which is always interesting.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, because who wants to be told you've been owned, right? Nobody likes that phone call.
But if you've got all the supporting evidence.
Yeah, I know I'm right. Yeah. I know I'm right at the end of the day. So I've definitely had to try to convince certain organizations that, no, you've probably been compromised. And just check on these things. If you don't want our help, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But we are here for you. So if you want help, just email us, call us, whatever. And then we've also had just full-on partnerships where they're like, hey, thanks for the heads up. Here's the data that we collected. If you want more data, we can share that too. Nice. And that ends up working really well for really the community at large because now we have a better view into the attack.
And that's for research purposes. That's not
cleanup service
Well, that's not associated with professional services.
No, this is really just because we want to do our due diligence and let people know. And, just also if we can get more research, we're greedy at the end of the day. That's really the main reason. We want more data. Yeah. So we can share it again, but then we want more data.
So is there a call to action to our viewers if any of them, suspect they've been breached? Is that something you'd like a phone call about?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So
that would be professional services.
Yeah, that would be professional services. So we won't do instant response. There is a very thin line that we won't cross.
We'll call you. You don't call us.
Kinda, yeah. Although we've also had instances where we've had different organizations reach out to us saying, "Hey, this is really weird. We don't know what it is. We've run it through everything that we have. We've done an analysis on it. We just can't figure it out. Can you take a look at it?" And sometimes it is actually interesting. And for us, we will start chasing that down, trying to relate it to other things or attribute it, and we end up with some really great research. So that has happened in the past. But I would say predominantly, the adversaries that I track, let's say the big four, they are high impact, but they are not common. The majority of organizations will likely never be attacked by these groups, or even ever see them or sniff them even.
It's good to know.
But if you do get hit by them, the impact is going to be monumental. Bad things are going to happen. So that's kind of the weird thing. It's like preparing yourself for all these minor earthquakes versus preparing yourself for the big one.
Wow.
Which one's more important? Which one's priority? And it depends. It really does, depending on your organization, depending on your security structure. Maybe you just want to focus on all these little events that are happening all the time. And it can be pretty challenging to prepare yourself for everything. And just like an earthquake, really. How do you prepare yourself for every little minor thing, plus the big thing that you feel like may or may not happen?
So I want to go back to an earlier question.
Yeah.
And so you wanted to say something about insurance.
Oh, yeah.
I know you wanted to say something about insurance. So I wanted
I'm just curious what it is.
Cyber insurance. So there was recently a claim made by an organization that was attacked, right? So they made an insurance claim for, it was like $10 million or something. They got breached. They lost money. The insurance company denied them the claim, saying that the attack was an act of war because that was not covered.
Oh.
So this gets interesting, right? Because now, the victim is now suing the insurance company.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious what that defense is going to be, because is the insurance company saying they have actively attributed this attack to a specific country? They know specifically who it is, and it is an actual act of war.
Like a declaration of war kind of thing. Wow.
Right. And are they going to say that in a court of law?
And that could force the government's hand.
That could just trigger a lot of different things there.
You know what's interesting? I just listened to an article on NPR that says Russia and Japan are still technically fighting World War II.
Yeah, and South Korea and North Korea also still at war.
Right.
Yep, tons of places still at war.
So are we thinking they've attributed it to one of those wars? Or?
No, I think they just didn't want to pay out. And I'm sure at some point someone mentioned, like, oh, this is maybe one of those APT things. And they're like, oh, okay, well, if it's state-sponsored, then
so they just saw
it's
a
an act of war. Yeah, and we're just going to pull on that, deny that $10 million claim, move along.
Wow.
I'm not sure if they actually thought that through and thought how they would defend that. Now, if they are able to positively attribute one of these attacks, I'd be very curious how they did that. And I don't know if they even want to reveal it. Now, in my own opinion, I think they just went ahead and said it without really thinking about it. So I don't know.
But I think there's some interesting thought there because you have, the Ukrainian power grid being taken down, and you have the impact that WannaCry had that affected civilians, affected systems, healthcare. People's lives were, put at risk. So to make that argument that some of these attacks are acts of war, I think that I'm not so sure that's a big leap. I think that we're coming to an edge there that may very well be.
Well, look at the Marriott breach. Their CEO was in the news this week saying that their breach was not significant as far as the impact to everyday Americans or citizens. And I completely disagree with that because the type of information a hotel collects on you, how often are you on the road? What company are you associated with? Have you taken trips to certain regions or countries where certain things have been happening? Have your trips mirrored someone else's trips? You can really back end into a lot of data based on it.
So it's interesting about the Marriott breach because it's thought that the group that breached them is also responsible for the Anthem breach as well as OPM.
One of the Pandas, I think.
Now, if you add up all of that data, that just got a little more interesting. Because if you, let's say, want a targeted collection on some individuals that you just had some interest in, you now know where they've been traveling, you know all their health issues, you know all their credit history, you know all their relatives, you know literally everything about them. But when you, again, look at that holistically, that gets significantly more interesting.
You can paint some really big pictures.
Absolutely. You can basically diagram an entire person's life with that amount of data you have. You start thinking, okay, there was obviously an operation done to collect as much data as possible, whether it was for specific individuals or if they just wanted to have a huge database of information to enumerate various Americans.
That makes you wonder if there's even more that has not been identified yet.
Probably. Highly likely. I mean, I would probably bet money on it.
Because I was at, I've been to a couple of customer sites, and I like to ask the question, what is your cybersecurity nightmare? And start a conversation there. And several times now customers have said, my nightmare is that my nightmare has already happened and I don't know it's actually happened.
Sounds like schizophrenia. Scary.
See, so I understand that mindset, especially coming from an operations background, right? I was just always under the assumption that we've been owned and I just need to try to
they said.
Figure it out, right?
Right.
On the flip side of it, I just feel like it's really depressing. It's really negative, and that type of attitude really starts feeding into the rest of your security team too, which I've seen over and over again. When your leadership has that type of negative attitude, then that sort of breeds this sort of discontent. They're like, why am I even here? We're owned anyway. Yeah, you're defeatist. Yeah. So as I like to keep mentioning, we know everything. Okay, not everything. I'll take that back. We know a lot. We know a lot about these adversaries, criminals, state-sponsored, espionage, whatever. We know a ton about them. And they keep using the same stuff over and over and over again. Why aren't we stopping them? I mean, it's kind of ridiculous if you think about it. But, understandably, there is the issue of scaling and, trying to enable your business and all that. But I really think we can do better.
And we can. And I think that's a big part of our company story is that we're still in the business of prevention.
Yep.
We don't assume breach like other vendors like to say. We pursue prevention and we're good at it.
Yep.
Right.
That it's interesting. I think it's fortunate that your team works with Palo Alto Networks, and I know you work for, but I like to say with because you have influenced the design of our products in several cases where you need a piece of information that doesn't exist, and so you talk to the designers, and now that information is available both to you and customers to make more intelligent decisions on.
right.
I didn't know this.
Oh yeah, I was going to cite some examples.
AutoFocus,
Yeah.
as an entire thing, that stemmed literally from our request for data, because at the beginning we just created a team. It's like 3 people, and just sat them in a room and like, all right, go. And obviously the first thing was, can we have data? And the answer was generally, what data do you need? And if you ask any researcher this, they're just going to tell you, I need all of it.
Yeah.
Now that was apparently a crazy request, because as a firewall company especially, we're collecting trillions of logs, and to put it all into one place that's searchable and fast, that was a monumental task. But they did come back and say, what if we could give you the malware sample data though? And we're like, okay, that's a pretty good start. So AutoFocus was born from that. So they created this basically searchable index that took in all the wildfire reports and basically made them easily searchable, easily pivotable, and just really extensible in looking into all those PDF reports. So rather than just opening every single report one by one, remembering that this string existed over here, and then just having to remember, okay, I opened 10 other reports, does this string also exist here? That doesn't make sense. So we made a system to do that. I think within about a year or 2, we basically started selling it. It was a weird conversation, because we were just like, but we're the only people using it. It's great. And the marketing people were like, well, if you say it's so great, we should sell it. And here we are today. That was actually just a really great example of how we sort of influenced the direction the company is going. And as we come out with new research, and sometimes we do find new tactics and new techniques that are being used. So most recently, the last couple of years or so, one of the kitten groups that we named Oil Rig. It's a terrible name. I named it. They have nothing to do with oil or rigs.
Oh, really?
Oil rigs. Yeah, I literally named it.
it was Middle East.
No, well, it is in the Middle East.
Yeah, okay.
One of the kitten groups.
That's right.
I believe Mandiant calls them APT 34. CrowdStrike calls them Helix Kitten, I believe. So anyway, yeah,
And
those
you
are
called
way.
them
I named them Oil Rig. I was the first to name them Oil Rig. I grouped them together, and I was like, this is nothing like I've ever seen before, so I need to give them a name. Me and my reverser, we went about 2 days of just giving each other stupid names. Like,
I saw that Slack
how about that one,
conversation.
that one? We're just like, that's racist, that's offensive, nope, we shouldn't do that, nope, that's too obvious. Eventually we just settled on Oil Rig because we got tired, and it just sounded not offensive and fine.
It was a Pickle Rick opportunity missed, I think.
The thing is, we have these requirements when we name things. Like, first of all, they have to be easy to say, so they can't be like 12 syllables or something. They have to be not offensive. They can't be trademarked. There's so many requirements in there.
Yeah.
No wonder they use kittens.
Right, it's not offensive. Yeah. So we've even had meetings on trying to come up with naming schema, and I think the last one we decided on was like adjective and monster. We then realized that a lot of monster names are actually trademarked. Yeah, by like the Magic the Gathering, right? Yeah, they have tons of monsters in there that we can't use.
Seriously.
Yeah, so
Hydra is trademarked?
So I recently used Dark Hydrus as a name. I sort of regret that name now as well, because it's too close to like all the other dark whatever names. I feel like I should have used a better adjective there. But it is Dark Hydrus now. Everyone refers to it as Dark Hydrus. I can't take it back.
Who are they? Or sorry.
Also a kitten group.
Okay.
I believe FireEye calls them APT 35? 36? 37?
Numbers are pretty
38.
easy.
Maybe 38. I can't
Somewhere
remember.
between 1 and 50?
It's somewhere up in the 30s.
Okay.
Somewhere. Anyway, this is a group that initially we caught wind of summertime of last year or so. Very similar to that oil rig group I was mentioning, but nothing concrete that says they're the same group. Just very similar tactics, but nothing that actually ties them. All their tools are slightly different, all their infrastructure is slightly different, so I had to give them a new name, Dark Hydrus. But where I was going with that was both of these groups love to use DNS tunneling for their command and controls. So this is not something that's common. I mean, as a pen tester, it's really easy because you're like, yeah, I'm just going to use DNS tunneling. It'll bypass everything.
Using Iodine or what tool?
Just custom DNS tunneling. So Oil Rig loved using PowerShell scripts that were basically Trojans, but they encoded DNS tunneling inside it. Dark Hydrus uses NS lookup for it. Yeah, it's really easy stuff. Wow. It's not complicated. And when you start looking for these artifacts that are happening on the system, you would be like, that's obviously malicious. Like, why that's, or at least it shouldn't exist, right?
Yeah.
But again, we're not really doing anything well to stop it from happening. In any case, because of that, we really start pushing to have DNS tunneling controls and protections into our firewalls as well. I think that was one of the reasons why we started launching the DNS proxy service.
There may be a DNS proxy feature that is already released or will soon
release.
Yeah. Well, because we don't know when this episode's going to launch, so it could easily be before PanOS 9.
Okay, well, if you want to cut it out, you can.
That's right.
But yeah, just having DNS controls and protections inside the firewall, because we've been observing these adversaries using DNS tunneling so often. In addition to just your traditional command controls. Most recently, the Dark Hydrus guys, I'm assuming they're mostly guys, but they may be women as well.
Yeah.
In any case, we recently published a blog on them, I think last Friday, where they also had an alternative method of command control using Google Drive, which is actually pretty cool. So they sort of use it as kind of like a third point to stage their command control. So they upload files into it, someone else logs into it, and they start modifying the files, which sends additional commands back to the backdoor. The Trojan itself doesn't have any credentials in it, so it initially has to do that DNS tunneling. And if the operator then wants to enable Google Drive, they then send the command to change it to the mode in addition to the actual API token. So when you look at the tool itself, all you know is it has a functionality. You don't know what account it's tied to. You don't know anything about it, because that all occurs in real time in the command control. But then once they get into Google Drive, they start modifying files. They can upload, download files from it. They send commands via Google Drive. That's pretty sneaky, to be honest.
That's freaking awesome. Because
how are you going to block that?
Yeah, well, a company might see that and say, "Oh, that's our G Suite that we
it's my user just going through their Google Drive. What's the big deal?" We haven't seen it in action, but it's definitely enabled there. We also saw the Sofacy group, or APT28 / Fancy Bear / Russians. We saw those guys using an email, a free email provider for their command control. That was actually pretty cool too. Much like the Google Drive one, they were sending emails out to like 6 different accounts, and depending on which account the operator logs into and the Trojan logs into, it gets certain commands or certain functions. And it was using like a Czech-based email provider, completely legitimate. I think it's like the Czech equivalent of Google, I think. So again, if you're kind of doing business in that region of the world,
it looks normal.
You can't block it,
yeah,
right? Now in the U.S., there's probably not a ton of reason to be using a Czech-based free email provider. Maybe I don't know.
I use Proton Mail.
Yeah,
they're Swiss-based.
Okay, there you go. So maybe it's possible, but yeah, it gets pretty interesting when you start seeing some of these guys modify their tactics slightly. Now, at the base of it all, it's still using just command control. It's some form of command control. They still have to get onto that system somehow. Most of it via phishing. It's really dumb phishing. Unfortunately, it still works. They still have to execute something. So if something gets dropped onto the system, we can talk about fileless malware and all that all the time. And people love hyping it up, but it's really misleading, because at some point there is a file somewhere.
Code has to be transferred somewhere.
Right. It doesn't magically appear on your system.
It doesn't have to touch memory or disk. It could always live in
Sure,
memory.
you could have a document that's malicious and it has some malicious code in it, and it only gets executed memory. Absolutely, but there's still a file.
Yeah,
it still got on there somehow. I think that's a thing I really like to try to tell people. Like, things don't just magically appear. There is no hacker wizard that just snaps their fingers and all of a sudden you're infected. That doesn't happen. It has to get onto you somewhere, right? Because oftentimes people are just like, I don't know how that got there. I'm like, well, no, I know how you got there. You clicked on something, you launched something, and now you're just lying about it.
So that reminds me. Have you ever seen The 13th Warrior?
I read the book a long time ago.
I read the book too. So in 13th Warrior, there's a scene in there, right? Because they have this mythical enemy that comes in, leaves no bodies, and then they disappear.
That's like the main story.
Yeah,
spoiler alert.
And so after
he's the 13th Warrior.
After the first attack, right? There's blood and there's some sort of conversation where the guy says something like they're human too, they're man too. In other words, we can kill this thing. They're not
immortal.
So they're not as mythical. It's the idea of fileless attack. If it does live in a file, there is the potential of
prevent it.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's preventable. It's not a magic attack.
So this kind of goes back into just not assuming that you're breached. We have so many opportunities to stop these attacks. At the initial ingress, preventing people from clicking on things. At the actual execution, preventing these weird files to launch. preventing weird files to drop onto the system, preventing the network activity, preventing the network activity back, preventing the exfiltration. There's so many steps, but we're not doing it well, and it gets frustrating. But I think we're certainly capable of it. Really, it has to be a change in mindset for a lot of these organizations, us included, really, to try to let everyone know that we don't have to just accept defeat. We don't have to accept that we've been owned. We can stop all this stuff. It's hard, though. One day we will get there.
Mark my calendar.
Just that specific.
Right, that day. Well, Bryan, I want to be conscious of your time. It's 3:00, so thank you so much for joining us today. Do you mind joining us for a future episode to continue the conversation?
Yeah, I love talking.
Nice.
That's like my whole life.
We love
This
listening.
has been fun.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.